So welcome everyone to our webinar on reopening the visitor economy and building confidence in Greater Manchester. Welcome to you all. This is, I think we've got 115 logged on this morning from our members and partners all over GM. We've got a great line of speakers here. But first of all, I just wanted to give you an introduction and some context to this, this session. So it's all about giving you confidence of the conversations that Marketing Manchester have had with over the last couple of months. We've been working on preparing for recovery, but also some holding activity and working with government really in terms of the standards and the lobbying in terms of the recovery and opening. So to set in context, the date of the 4th of July is still there. Matt Hancock's announced that a while ago in terms of opening for tourism, hospitality and leisure. And as you know, we wait the announcement next Monday, 15th of June, in terms of the standards from UK Hospitality coming out and DCMS, of course, and the kite mark, if we can call it a kite mark from Visit Britain, would go along with that. So Marketing Manchester and our board, several of those members have been working with the key people in government on several things, including the standards, but also on quarantining, the opening, 2-metre rules, etc., etc. A few rumours about some of the sector opening up on the 22nd of June, bars and restaurants. It's still a rumour as far as I know. And we also saw some other openings. So zoos are opening from Monday, which is great. They're under DEFRA, of course. And the self-catering standards we received yesterday. So there's a lot going on. We remain flexible to respond to all of that. But what to do before handing over to our great speakers is just to give you an idea of what we've been doing on the campaign side. So I'll just share with you, let's see, just a few slides just to kick off the session. Got a huge challenge, all of us together, in terms of what tourism, hospitality and leisure means to Greater Manchester. It's a £9 billion economy in terms of providing jobs for 101,000 people. It's massive. And the estimates, projected estimates, is that we will lose almost half of that value to the economy. So 4.2 million could be lost to the GM economy by the end of August. So this is an industry that's on its knees. We need to support it. And already we've heard about business closures, potential mass unemployment. So we're doing everything we can to try and help out. So I just wanted to share with you, first of all, a holding campaign that we've been running, Manchester Misses You, which is a collection of virtual, educational and online content. It's been getting really good audiences, quite a lot of people at home with downtime. So it's just making people think about what's outside of their walls, wishing they could be in places such as these. So the culture sector in particular have come up really good in this. We've had lots of media interest in this in terms of really good performance in that campaign and over 60 web articles of online content. So we'll run that continuously until it's needed, or certain elements of the sector will open up in turn, and some will take a bit longer, especially on our cultural colleagues. And in terms of the recovery campaign, we will be running a full briefing month about the recovery campaign, but this is just to give you a bit of a teaser what we've been working on. Our campaign is the overall.
Sorry, Sheona, just in case are you meant to be sharing something? Because I don't think we can see anything.
Oh, great. Okay, so can you see now? No.
Nothing yet, no.
Any better? No. Perhaps Stu, can you help me out here if you can see your application window? How's that then? Can you see that now? I think it's just frozen actually. Yes, you can see it. Brilliant, fantastic, thank you. So the challenge then really is, as explained, Manchester Misses You campaign that we ran, a coding campaign, and real performance. And in terms of recovery campaign, we'll be running a Find Your Space campaign, that's the umbrella campaign, and we'll be updating that at the next members meeting. And Find Your Space, it's a really flexible campaign because it's a very wide interpretation of space. Could be, you know, headspace, physical space, space to recommend. We're all entering into a new space. It could be space to meet, space to learn for our universities, virtual space, space to reconnect, as well as being that literal translation of social distancing. There's several campaign strands which we'll unlock when we speak to you later in the month, but Find Your Space that can then extend to space to learn and to meet, and we'll continue the Manchester Misses You campaign. In all of that, I think the one message I'll leave with you is that the economic recovery of this sector is really fundamental to everything in Greater Manchester. Our towns, cities and villages rely on this sector, and we can't do it alone. Marks Manchester isn't awash with cash, especially at this time when we've lost most of our commercial income. So I think in collaboration and partnership, in true Mancunian spirit, we'll get through this together. So I think in terms of going to the speakers then, if I just stop sharing my, I hope you got all of that. I think in terms of going to our speakers, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to this lineup of speakers. So we've got Janet Utley, who is the head of Visit Transformation Project at Visit England. Nicola Cunningham, area manager, North and Central Expedia Travel, who's joined by Director Daniel Sharbert, who is the Director of UK and Ireland from Expedia. And in the audience somewhere is a colleague, Cassandra, who just looks after Manchester from Expedia. So we've got the full Expedia team out today. Dave Harrison joins us, who's Director, Centre for Assessment at the Growth Company. And also Steve Banks, who's Director of Customer Experience, Capita Travel and Events.
Morning.
So the idea of our speakers is to share hot off the press in advance of reopening. And so I'm just going to hand over now to Janet Utley to head us off from Visit Britain. Over to Janet.
Thank you. And thank you for asking me to join you. The work that we've been doing over the last month and a half now is looking at recovery. What can we do to support and help industry get back from being on its knees? And we're very conscious that we've got lots of businesses that are really struggling right now. We have, in consultation with a lot of the industry bodies like UK Hospitality, ALVA, BALPA, MIA, all of those various bodies we've talked to them about what can we do in this space in terms of making sure that the consumer feels confident about returning to a tourism business, returning to a restaurant, and have that reassurance and confidence. Do we need to look at some form of badging? We were concerned that there were lots of spin-offs happening in this space in terms of saying that you are ready to accept business. So we wanted to be sure and be clear that as an industry, we were working all together under one umbrella. So we've worked really closely with DCMS. And what we've done within what we're calling at the moment our industry standard, with a working title of We're Good to Go, which we're looking at a launch of the end of next week, but that is still under discussion because obviously we've got to wait for the key guidance. That's a critical thing from DCMS, just in case anything changes from government. The standard, really in terms of the consultation of how we got to this point, there were three very clear asks, and those very clear asks were, we need help with reassuring for locals that tourism is doing what it should do and is listening and being careful and is across all guidance. We need something that makes us as a business feel that we have done what we can in this space and that we follow correct guidance, and that there's a lot of guidance out there right now, and we were very conscious of that. I'm very conscious of how in this space it's very easy to follow one set of guidance. So I'll give you a really strong example here. We are working with the devolved nations, with Visit Scotland, Visit Wales, Tourism Northern Ireland. Their rules on social distancing is different to ours. We are still at 2 metres. But if you happen to break that because you read another piece of guidance that tells you 1.5 metres, you are in effect going against government guidelines. So that's why it's important that we have that check and balance in place for you. And then the other reason really was for us to think about internationally, and Manchester, obviously your international market is incredibly important to you. And in this space, we know from our in-market teams that right now, our reputation is not brilliant in how we're handling COVID. So what we do domestically and the actions that we take through the work, such as how the industry standard will work and how we as businesses start to go towards recovery, that is really important. That is what's going to help us when we can get back to international marketing next year. So all of our money in terms of an organisation in relation to campaigns is being put into domestic. We're working really closely with Sheona and with Nick. Marketing Manchester are very much part of the decision-making process that we go through. They feed in all the time. There is another call with all of our destinations on Friday, which Nick is part of, and Sheona feeds into the tourism industry emergency response group. So that's important to say. Manchester has a very clear voice in the decision-making of where we're going. So going back to the industry standard, this is going to be something that is unlike accreditation schemes or other schemes that we've had in normal times. This is not something for subsectors like accommodation and attractions only. This is going across the whole of the industry. So we're talking business events, we're talking churches that are reopening, we're talking restaurants, we're talking all of those things that sit under the UK hospitality umbrella. And why that's important to us, as I say, is as a collective, if we work together and we promote together and we're under one badge and umbrella to say we've got this going and we have this guidance in place, it will benefit us in what we want to achieve next year when we're talking international. So the industry standard, and I could go on at length, so I'll try to keep it brief. The format will be an online complete. Industry told us that's what it needed to be. The online complete will be no more than 20 questions. And if you're following or are aware of Public Health England guidance and you are aware of your industry body guidance and you are and will be, it's not there yet, DCMS guidance is next week, tentative date release. If you have those guidance documents, this online complete is not going to be an issue for you. Obviously, key things, risk assessments, aware of social distancing and cleanliness. Always key things, always in anything in this space. So you go through that online complete, and at the end of it, once you've signed the virtual agreement, you are able to use the "We're good to go" marking and branding across all of your social platforms, across all of your marketing, and also anything else that helps you with convincing stakeholders that you have done and followed government guidelines and you are in the right space. Once you have that, and there'll be a small toolkit with that to support you, that is not where the journey stops with this one, because through that registration, we need you to register an email address should any guidance change that is crucial, critical, and urgently needed to be got out to you. So if social distancing changes, if there is a change on face coverings, face masks, we know it's on transport right now. If that changes and after we go live, we will get an alert out to you. So alongside our alert system, Marketing Manchester would get that through our destination management organisations, but we will also make sure anybody that signs up also gets an alert. And that way we keep you across all key guidance as fast as we can. Also within that, where there will be spot checks, we're doing around about 5% of all sign-ups on spot checks. And we have to do that because we have to show robustness here. We have to show that this is a process, that there are checks and balances in place. And if there are issues, if locals raise issues, if customers raise issues, that there is a process in place to deal with that. That helps you to articulate you followed something in a robust way as well. I think in a nutshell, that's where we're at with the standard. As I have said, on the We're Good to Go, we're looking at the end of next week as an official launch. If we can get it earlier, we will, but it is now dependent on us waiting on that last rung of the government guidance to make sure that we're all compliant and we're all across that. And Sheona and Nick are very much part of the tier grouping, do understand where that process is at right now. Happy to take questions and happy for anybody to get in touch either directly to me or through Nick, whichever works for you. Obviously, we want what we do to be useful to you and to help. I should, on my final point, say that this does form part of the main domestic recovery campaign. So it doesn't just stop at a mark and a mark is only down to you. We will be doing an awful lot in terms of sharing it via all of the social platforms, all of the marketing, and there will be some robustness behind it in that way, which again is a different space for us. We don't normally do that as a rule, but with this particular situation, we need to. There is research which I'm sure Sheona and Nick share with you that comes out every 2 weeks in relation to customer sentiment tracking, and there will be a link for you to have that. That's something that is going to happen every week now from here on in. So those reports will go back to Nick, so Marketing Manchester have them and can share them with you. Any questions at all, do please ask away.
Brilliant, thanks Janet for being so concise on all of that. And I think the research that you talked about, we share through our Marketing Manchester newsletters. They're also put on our website, so marketingmanchester.com. So if you can't get hold of them, go on there or speak to any of the team, Steph, Nick or myself. So Janet, just on that, just a couple of questions. What is success from the Kite Marketing Standards going to look like? So how will we know we have achieved success, or how do we measure or evaluate this scheme?
So we have around 43 industry bodies that have come forward. Not all will be on a drop-down bar of being a member and be part of that, because not all have strong guidance in place. So to work with an industry body, as a good example, UK Hospitality, there has to be robust guidance that is given that is sectoral and it is relevant. That is checked. It is not only being checked by us, it's being checked by DCMS. We will have a call handling system, and the call handling system will pick up and help any of those not part of a membership body. So don't panic if you fall outside of that. How success looks like, well, it's all 43 of those bodies behind us and with us and sharing across their platforms. It is the sign up coming through from those bodies and also from independents. And it is the sign up and the support from our 157 destination management organisations. Totally, in terms of evaluation, we would be looking obviously at the number of sign-ups, but I think the key thing is that we've got messaging going out via the industry bodies so that we are a collective voice, and that's the bits that we're looking at. So as it stands right now, the industry bodies that have signed up with their guidance is already a reach of over 25,000. But of course, because we know we've gone from 30 to 43, that grows even more. So it's in terms of the sign up.
Great, thanks, Janet. And also, what are the barriers, do you think? What are the main barriers to the success of this initiative?
The main barriers right now are that we can't go as fast as we would like to go. We would like this to be with you now, but we can't do that. We're dealing with a pandemic. We have to follow, as government tell us constantly, the science. We can't go live right at this moment in time, because if we go live right now and the guidance changes already, we've got a situation where we're sharing with you the wrong information. So I think that's the barrier. The real barrier is in terms of getting go live. We have zoos going live on Monday already. We've got gardens, and I see you've got RHS on as one of your guests here today, and we've got gardens that are live already. I suppose really the key thing is it's through having the conversations that we have uncovered where there are gaps, and that in itself has been a positive. If nothing else is gained from this work, the very fact that we've identified gaps that are there for the businesses, and I'm not going to say the sectors that the gaps have been in, because that would be unfair, because it's been addressed, but the very fact that we've had that conversation has already moved us forward as an industry. So that's a real plus.
Great. And I think I read in some of the insights somewhere about the use of a kite mark of some way, shape or form. So if businesses are using We Are Good to Go, there's more propensity for consumers to then engage with that business.
Absolutely.
It's quite high, Janet, isn't it? I can't remember the stat, but maybe you can elaborate on that.
Well, Yes, there was some ALVA research, and I haven't got that in front of me, but there has been some ALVA research that has shown customer confidence in use of that, and certainly we can share that snapshot so you can push it out in your next newsletter. But customer confidence in terms of seeing something that they've seen over and over again, it's all back to that basic opportunities to see thing, isn't it? The more you see it, the more you hear it, the more it's a trusted source. Bit like food standards, with our food standards emblems that we see, we will recognise that, we will understand that now. We'd like to get into that space. I don't think we're hung up about being in that space. We're more hung up about making sure businesses have got what they need in terms of that support. So if we can get to that, that would be fantastic, because that would really, really help us.
Great. And I guess one last question before I go to some of the questions from our members today is, have you looked to any other countries are ahead of this in this game? It's completely new to us all, of course, but have you picked up any best practice from other cities, regions, countries that are doing this in a good way?
We certainly have, and we UK Hospitality have KPMG is one of their members, and they have done some work in Singapore. And the work in Singapore is incredibly impressive, but also what's impressive is the amount that has been invested in that. And that's the other thing to be mindful of, in terms of you can only do what you can do with the spend that you have. In terms of other countries in Europe, we know Portugal, Spain, we know that they've got things that are live. We don't have evidence of other countries that have followed it in this way. And the reason why it's frustrating for me that we can't go live yet is that right now we've got something that sets us a little bit apart, which helps our international teams. If we delay this much longer, we risk that opportunity to have that real space of, we've taken it one step further. We've not just issued a brand, we've actually issued and set it against that government guidance. And I think that's the key element. We've not gone down the route of talking safe or legal or safety, because we've been told and we've been made aware that actually that can be a challenge for the businesses using that terminology. So what we've done is we've tried to set ourselves outside of that, and set ourselves in terms of what's going to make our customers feel that work has gone and has been actioned. And I will allude here to retail, because what we've seen with retail, what we've seen with our outdoor spaces that are now open, is an issue with public behaviour. So if you look at the messaging that retail have taken and how they've moved from that safe, follow this, it's now respect us, it's now work with us, so that we're good to go, enables a business taking that to give that additional layer of raising that thing of staff actually are almost our key workers, our tourism key workers, and they deserve respect. And when you are at a venue, you need to follow the guidelines. So it's not just our responsibility, it's all of our responsibility. And that's the thinking behind that we're good to go, as opposed to we're safe.
Yeah, good. Thanks for explaining that, Janet, because I think that is a really important point. So several people have asked, so Tony, Andy and Emma, about information. So can we share a list of the 43 industry bodies? So I'm assuming we can. CMS guidelines, of course, on the Visit Britain website. So at the end of this, we will send the slide decks and all of those links to you in an email. So we'll make sure that that's on there, either on the Marketing Manchester Tourism Hub website, and we'll also put the links to the Visit Britain's website as well.
Can I just say one thing in relation to the industry bodies? They are all at the moment signing their service level agreements with us, because we have to have that in place. So the list of who those bodies are will be shared with our destination management organisations on Friday. So that's more likely to be in the public domain Friday, early next week.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, and so we'll make sure we send out a members newsletter every week, so we'll make sure that that's on the relevant newsletter. One other question, so Nancy, I think, so in COVID times, how big a slice is the domestic market, and how much do we anticipate the percentage of domestic trade will increase to fill the international gap, if it's filled? Good. So in a minute, Janet, see if you can...
Thanks, Nancy. The domestic market is the key focus now because it has to be. We know that there is absolutely no point in spending money internationally right now, right at this moment in time. So any monies that we have in relation to marketing has, as I've said, has been repurposed. In terms of the percentages, do have a look at the brand tracker and the information on the research side. I don't have that in front of me. Happy to feed that back. But as we stand right now, we as a national tourist board do not do domestic marketing campaigns. And Sheona and Nick know that because Sheona and Nick are quite regularly the ones saying, why aren't you doing a domestic campaign? From government, our remit is international. So the space that we have moved in because of COVID is to look at, well, okay, we know that we need to realign and look at domestic. And that's the change. It's a big shift and change for us. And there may be, post-COVID, more that comes from that. But right now, we're dealing with what we can do on messaging for COVID. So in terms of some stats for you, Nancy, can certainly get you some.
Nancy, it deserves a wider conversation, this, so we'll try and include this on our members update next week. I mean, we are definitely focused on super local to start with. Our campaign will be hyper local, into regional, and then domestic. It'll be domestic for the next 6 months, but we will be warming up the international markets when it's ready, but it'll be a big part for us. Okay, so thanks, Janet. Thank you very much. I might come back to you, and we'll have 15 minutes at the end for lots of questions and a discussion amongst you. But I'm now going to hand over to Dave Harrison, who is Director of Centre for Assessment at the Growth Company. And Dave works with clients nationally and international on all sorts of risk assessments. This is probably pretty new in terms of, you know, a recovery and opening and living with COVID. So I'm going to hand over to Dave to tell us about services that are applicable in these times. Dave.
Good afternoon, or good morning, just about, to everybody. I hope you're all well. Yes, so Centre for Assessment, you may not have heard of us before. So we're what's called a certification body. We work predominantly with a range of national and international standards. You may have heard of ISO standards. So you've got quality, you've got health and safety, environmental, and one on information security. We also work with customer service excellence and a standard called Excel, as well as a linked standard for biocontamination within the laundry industry. So we were asked a while ago to look at risk assessments and have successfully offered a risk assessment tool with guidance to many sectors, particularly the 8 settings that the government posted as we started to return to work post-COVID, or as we map our way through the COVID situation. So I just wanted really to share with you a number of areas within the risk assessment that you might find useful to consider and look at as you yourselves consider going back into work and getting your businesses and other organizations ready for your staff to return. So for me, it all starts pre-work, before you actually get back there, in thinking about it. And there are some particular legal requirements you need to be aware of. So firstly, the Health and Safety at Work Act does give the requirement to carry out a risk assessment. So you need to consider of all the safe angles for your workplace. We have actually created a free download tool that is available on our website, and the link will be shared to this following this presentation today. Marketing Manchester are going to send that round, and so do have a look at that. It is free, and you can actually link that back to the government website as well for the guidance that's available. So it's most important, I think, as Janet said, whatever actions you take, typical on cue, my dog has started barking. Hopefully that won't continue. Do link back to the government guidance. It's most important that you do that, and of course to visit England, and of course visit Britain, sorry, there with their website too. Most importantly, you've got to decide on what policies you want to put in place, such as the numbers of people you're going to bring in, social distancing, use of public areas like your kitchens, your toilets, and other customer areas as well. How are you going to control customers, for instance, when they come into your place? So before you go back in looking at all of those, You might need to consider travel to work. How can you avoid peak times and public transport, if that is possible? And encourage maybe driving, which is a little bit unusual for us, because previously we've been trying to do encourage people to go public transport, and now we're actually saying the opposite, which is, you know, odd for us. It is very important as well that you involve your staff in whatever solutions that you come up with. So you need to consult with them and make sure that they are happy and comfortable with what's going on, because some of them will be very nervous about the situation, and some of them will also have issues that they may not be able to come to work. So can you be flexible with them? So in your work areas you've got, I'm sure you've all seen and witnessed examples of notices being erected, rules on the numbers of peoples. Perhaps you've seen the footprints on the floor to guide and keep the 2 meter distancing. So marking out floors, perhaps one-way systems, and in some cases, if circumstances allow it, multi-entry and exit points. You may need to have a deep clean, and more regular disinfecting of all areas of work that not just your staff are involved in, but particularly public as well. So thinking about any surfaces, railings, bars that you may have. You would need to provide some rules and guidance on the personal protective equipment that you are providing and recommending that people use. As well as sanitizer. Face masks have been mentioned, and there's widespread publication, particularly for transport, and people must wear those for future. One that's very important if you've got water systems. I'm sure everybody's heard of Legionnaire's disease, and there is testing that is required. This is potentially very serious, because I believe people can get huge fines and go to jail if they get it wrong. You're going to need to look at flushing your systems and getting that tested. You may also have stocks of food and beverages that could be out of date or nearing those, and again, needs considering action to be taken, perhaps destroying those. Of course, we've all heard about the government's guidance on consistent from the start, washing our hands regularly. So what have you got in terms of facilities for washing hands? Have you got hot water in sufficient supplies? Do you have the soap, the sanitizers available? And making sure that everybody has got those. If you've got desk areas, then considering things like erecting screens, or maybe not everybody's face to face, they could actually be back to back as one avoidance technique. Do people work together in groups? We've had good examples of people where they have little work groups that they stick to the same work groups and don't mix different groups together, so that that could contain any little issues or potential infections. Consider the working methods that you've got. You've got to train people. As I said, consulting people, again, the ongoing communication, training, involving people. It's very important to try and win the hearts and minds, particularly for those that are worried, but also for those that are generally coming back to work. You need to give them the confidence that you're in control of the situation and that you've thought of everything you can. I've mentioned about start and finish times. If you can be flexible on shifts, on the way people work, and if maybe some people could work from home, again, that's a key point, that avoid people going into the workplace if they can, or even if it's reducing people going into the workplace, that is all going to help. I mentioned there about practical management of customer areas. I don't know about you, but I've been to the shops the odd time, to the supermarket. They've got a marshal there ensuring people, numbers of people coming into areas, that they stick to the limits of staying apart, that they don't go in groups. It's one at a time. So another consideration for you. Some of the sector, again, local fish and chip shop, that to me got a click and collect. We've seen examples of pubs and restaurants who are offering food, doing click and collect, and also avoiding money, so that going to card payment only, and in many cases paying online with that click and collect to avoid the contact. So again, particularly if you've got vulnerable staff, do engage with them, do look at the situation. It might not be about them, it might be about members of their family, a parent, a child. What pastoral care can you offer to them to help them get through it? You probably saw a couple of weeks back the Mental Health Awareness Week. Lots of people are struggling mentally with the situation, as well as perhaps having physical issues. So all needs to be taken into account. Do you have procedures in place for if somebody were to become ill at work with COVID symptoms? Again, maybe many people wouldn't have done that, but it's maybe time to look at it now and make sure that you've got that and what to do and how to deal with them, and to train people if they become ill within work that they must flag this and they must leave the workplace as soon as possible, but obviously informing managers or owners of the business. Have you thought about how you could minimize actual physical meetings in the workplace amongst your staff, using technology where possible? We're using Livestorm today. There's Teams, there's Zoom, there's many things being publicized that can minimize the risk of actually meeting up and help. If you've got people who are working at home, then you may need to consider how you assess their home workplace from a health and safety point of view as well. And you may need to think about phased return. So hopefully those few things there are helpful in starting to give you some things to think about. I am around for questions for the rest of the session, so please do ask if you have any.
Great, Dave, that's really good. I mean, in terms of risk assessment, I know I went back into our office and just to pick up a desk, a laptop, because I've got a bad back. But I've looked at the fridges and absolutely, you know, they would need a deep clean themselves, never mind anything else. So we're putting in place lots of screen dividers, spacing out desks, putting one-way systems in before any of the staff coming in. But we've also been thinking about, okay, what is the risk for, you know, staff working at home? So all of that is really important. So thanks very much, Dave, for that. Any questions that we'll push back into you, we'll give, along with the information pack to follow this, we'll give your information to the members who have logged in today. So thanks very much. So on next to our speakers from Expedia Travel. So I'm going to invite Daniel Sharbert, who's the Director for UK and Ireland, to kick the session off. And he's joined by Nicola Cunningham, who is the Area Manager for the North and Central of England. So over to Daniel and Nicola.
Thanks very much for the introduction. And I'm going to try to share something. So let's see if that works. So you have a little bit of visual support. Let's see. Technology work. Anyone from the panel could give me like a thumbs up?
Yeah, good. You can see.
Perfect, great. Okay. So that's the first thing already done. So as I said, again, thanks very much for having us. Thanks for everyone participating. I hope everyone is good. It's nice to see when I look through the list of people attending that there's some names I recognize. So my name is Dan. I'm Director for UK and Ireland for Expedia Group, and I'm on the call today with Nicola, who will have much more details on the Manchester specific details, because she's based with me in Manchester and looks after the north and centre of England. What we wanted to do today with you is give you some very high-level insights of what we're seeing from other countries that may be a few weeks ahead of where the UK is. And then Nicola will dive deeper into specifics that are relevant to Manchester, some trends that we're already seeing, and things that we as Expedia Group are doing at the moment to obviously support the business. We mainly deal with the accommodation providers, so we're mainly part of the account management team that works with your hotels, with your vacation rentals, so on and so forth. So kind of like this is the audience that we really mainly cover in the following slides. Okay. I want really, if you take anything away from me for today, as I said, Nicola will go more into the details, is that I want to leave you with a positive message, because if we look at our neighbors, you know, if we look at some of the countries that already eased some of the restrictions, you can see that, for example, if we look here at Spain, that since the announcement was made on easing the restrictions, reopening the borders, removal of mandatory quarantine, that you can see that the number of hotel bookings have increased significantly. And we put Singapore there as a comparison because at the time there was no lockdown, but I could have used any other country. So you can really see that there's a difference between countries that are moving forward, that are announcing versus that are not. On the next slide, very similar picture. If we look at the air sales that happened in Italy on the announcement day, so you can really see that there was an increase, that customers feel more comfortable of traveling once they know that the government restrictions have been lifted. And also, I don't have any data on this to share, but very similarly, you know, I guess most of you will be aware that Ireland brought the day of opening forward. And actually from this day on, you can really see the customers booking again. There's a positive trend in bookings. So all I'm saying is that travel will come back once we have everything in place. And I want to leave you with that positive outlook, which I guess we all need some positivity these days. If I look now into specifically the UK and Manchester, the next slide, it looks a little bit different. So let me talk you through what you see here. So you will see in the blue line, the number of bookings that are being made. And on the red line, the number of cancellations that are happening. And then you have two bars. So you have the gray bar, which indicates, okay, there's more bookings versus cancellations. And then the red bar, which indicates, obviously, there's more cancellations versus bookings. And you really see that the trend between the UK, if you look at the UK overall, versus Manchester in particular, is very similar. So you can see, obviously, that from when the lockdown started, the cancellations spiked, and you can see that there's a drop in bookings. And we can see that whilst the cancellations have come down, so they're very steady, there is no rebound yet that we can see for the UK or for any of the cities that are obviously within the UK. So you can see that the number of purchases, again, that's the blue line, is very minimal. But hopefully the minute we get the restrictions in place, we have clear guidance, we give confidence to the customers, they feel comfortable, there's a safety message that the accommodation providers can give them, similar to what we've seen in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, in Ireland, that should see a positive trend. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to hand over to the expert who is, as I said, based in Manchester. Her team is looking after the North. You will, I hope most of you will know Cassandra as the account manager for Expedia Group. So I'm going to hand over now to Nicola, who can talk us through some more details of what.
Cheers, thanks, Dan. Can you move on to the next slide for me, please? So hi everybody. I think the majority of the hotels will probably know me. For those of you who don't, as Dan says, I look after North and Central England, and we're based here in Manchester. So in terms of booking demand, as you can see from what Dan has shared, we have relatively modest numbers, but of those, we thought it'd be good to see what trends are emerging so far. So if we look at city centre and Salford, we can see that it's kind of in a bit of a U shape in terms of demand, right? So 0 to 6 days, about 35% of the bookings are coming in. And then 121 plus is 36% of the bookings that we're seeing. The average length of stay there is 3.1 days, which is an increase, as many of you will know, on the 2.2 days that we traditionally saw in this submarket. What is really interesting, and I know that the focus will obviously have to be on domestic business, is that our package share, so our hotel and our flight together, has held relatively well. So it's 5% of the business that we're seeing at the moment. It would traditionally be somewhere between 8 and 10%. So for it to still be relatively high is quite good news. And those points of sale, as I mentioned, you can definitely see domestic very heavy there at 80%, but 5% of the business coming in still from US markets. And breaking down the lodging type that we see, it's about 2/3 hotel and about 1/3 apartments or apart hotels. Moving out to the airport then, obviously much higher number of hotel product out there, so that's holding steady at 95%. But the booking windows are relatively similar. So short lead bookings still predominantly there in the 0 to 6, and again 121 days out is 30% of the bookings. Again, average length of stay increases, and I think a lot of that points to key workers, essential workers, people who need to stay for longer lengths of time. And again, package share is holding well at the airport as well. And then looking at Greater Manchester, so outside of those two specific submarkets, the rest of the market, we're seeing about 70% in the short lead. Much longer length of stay. So I think we can, if we join the dots, definitely pull out of that it is essential workers and key workers who are needing to stay in the region at the moment. And the domestic share is an awful lot higher as well, as you can see there, coming in at 87%. So if you can move on to the next slide for me, Dan, that would be great. So what other common themes are we seeing? And really what we're seeing that the vast majority of reservations in the region are being booked on flexible rates. So the idea of non-refundable rates is definitely not something that's going to take off at the moment. I think consumers and customers are still a little bit nervous, a little bit unsure, and they just want to know that they have that flexibility to cancel should they need to. In line with what Janet was talking about earlier on, there's a very definite spike in cleanliness assurance, people wanting to be reassured that their hotels or their accommodation will be clean, that it will be following all of the social distancing guidelines and so on. And then the other interesting thing that we saw was that 47% of reservations across the entire market are coming through on a mobile device, and that actually increases to about 52% when we look at the city centre and Salford region. So I guess people not being in the office, not being on a desktop, having to use mobile devices and become more comfortable booking on those is another trend that we are seeing as well. So if we move on then down to the next slide, what sort of actions can you take using this data, right? So how can we use this to inform our decisions going forward? And I guess the key thing is to make sure that we have inventory as far out as possible. So while everybody is in lockdown, there's definitely still the urge to travel and people want to explore, and they are planning their next holiday and their next trip. I know I definitely am. So making sure that you have inventory available so that they can include you in their consideration for next year is really, really key. In order to drive that conversion piece, making sure that you have a flexible rate that's attractive, available to your consumers, I think is also going to be key in ensuring that you convert those lookers into bookers, and then really working on your content. So this could be a really good opportunity for you to get some photographs of the hotel or the apartment complex while it's vacant or while there's not as much foot traffic there. You may be able to get some really strong images, and again highlighting the cleanliness that is so important for the customers at the moment. So in order to help our hotel partners do that, sorry Dan, let's move on to the next slide. We've set up a kind of COVID zone within our extranet. So within Partner Central, when you log in, the first thing you're greeted with is everything, all things COVID-19. And the two that I really want to touch on are the top two that you can see there. So tracking traveler activity as the region recovers, and then looking at the health and safety amenities. So on the next slide, you'll be able to see what we're currently seeing in terms of demand. So this isn't bookings, but it's what searches are currently happening across our region at the moment. So in this example, it looks at Manchester, which is the city centre, and Salford. And you can see that it's still behind year over year. On the y-axis there, it's a percentage. But as we move on through the different stay dates, you can see that there are more searches coming through in December and again in January as well. So while it's not back or while it's not back to the level we would like it to be, I think looking at it with a more positive mindset, we can see that there's definitely a lot more interest starting to come back into the region, which is really good. And then in order to support that, and again, everything that Janet covered in the her piece earlier on, sorry, Dan, the next slide there, we've also included that health and safety space so that we can communicate really clearly to the customers what cleaning is happening on your property level, and also what safety measures you have taken on property level as well. So again, I guess reinforcing and reassuring the customers around the health and safety piece so that they feel comfortable booking their stay with you. And I think we've one final slide, Dan, I think you wanted to cover as well, which is on Revive and Relief, which is our new support for the industry that we will be launching in the future.
That's right. Thanks, Nicola. Just a quick sneak peek, I guess. So this is a program that we're going to launch for the entire UK in early of July, to go in line with the opening date that we're really having at the moment. And it will include 2 areas. So we really want to encourage our partners, so we will make to our partners available marketing material or marketing tools that really will help them and say, okay, look, I need to focus on certain times of the year, certain areas that really help them push the traffic to this area. So that's the Revive part. And then the Relief part, we really want to work together with our partners and saying, okay, what can we do? How can we help you to take the commercial pressure off you in some way, shape, or form? Might that be in delaying commission payments? Might that be in giving you, some more flexibility in the way you can work with us? So as I said, more details should be shared early of July. But as I said, we wanted to give you a sneak peek preview of what else we're doing at the moment. And I think that's all we had for now. Let me see if I can share. And obviously we're available for any questions that you may have.
Great. Dan, Nicholas, thanks so much for whipping through all of that. And just to reassure our members that that pack will be shared with them. So we've just got a couple of questions. So from Nick. So will you be using, Expedia be using the standards from Visit Britain that come down, the industry standard that Janet outlined?
Yes, so kind of like what we do on a regular basis, we're reviewing what the different requirements are per country, and then update our requirements as well to be able to meet the different standards.
Yeah. A lot of that was about cleanliness, and perhaps we could share with our businesses how best to communicate that they are clean.
Yeah. What I would recommend, and I think we're talking with a lot of our accommodation partners already at the moment, is really to look at that section on the extranet, because this really translates one-to-one into the customer-facing side of our platforms. So the customer can really see, okay, those are the items that have been delivered, and what we're going to do, because as I said, there's a spike of searches for cleanliness assurance. We even are testing at the moment if there should be filters to be able to sort by certain health and hygiene factors as well.
Okay, so it's all on the website. And maybe a question for Nicola. You mentioned about the mobile device, the increase to 47%. Yeah. I'm not sure what it was before, but how do businesses then utilise that knowledge to make their content better for the mobile booker?
Yeah, so it was in the mid-30s, kind of pre-COVID, and had sustained around about sort of 35 to 38%. I mean, obviously within that, some hotels had higher percentages than others. I guess the key things are imagery, as it ever is, making sure you've good quality images that don't pixelate on mobile devices, that can be enlarged and made smaller. That's one way of doing it. They can target those customers with mobile specific promotions. We have a very robust members only program that we offer, and that's available to people who've downloaded our apps. So again, they can utilize those fenced spaces to really promote their properties to those customers who are specifically looking in those booking windows and through those devices.
Great, thanks Nicola. Thanks to Nicola and Dan. We'll come back to you at the end for some questions, and just to reassure that we'll pass on your contact details as well as Cassandra's to our partners. Okay, so on to our last speaker, Steve. Thanks for being patient. So Steve Banks, Director of Customer Experience at Capita Travel and Events, and Steve's going to talk about the current landscape in terms of what tourism looks like, and specifically for the corporate traveller. Over to you, Steve.
Great, thank you very much, and hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Okay, so from our perspective, we have circa 300 customers, predominantly buying hotels, rail and flights. So we've got a range of customers spending from sort of £100,000 a year to £40 million a year. And as you can imagine, completely across a range of industries, and I suppose all those customers are asking, what does the current landscape look like? So predominantly we're finding, obviously, as most agents are finding, businesses significantly down. Really at this moment in time, the only travel currently being undertaken is by key workers. But all the organisations are gearing up for a return in some shape or form. And we're particularly busy, I suppose, in our consultancy and our account management areas in working with our customers to understand what returning to a new norm looks like. That state of readiness, again, differs from industry to industry. So we've got certain industries such as construction, utilities, that have been, to a certain extent, very much business as usual, actually, and in some instances, an increased demand for travel. But most of our organisations we deal with recognise that the risk of travel has moved from, I suppose, perceived to be an on-trip to actually pre-trip. And the question that they're asking is, when and for what do you need to travel? So historically, many organisations would have been looking and saying, we know what we spend and we know where we spend it. They didn't know why and they didn't know how. Those two questions are probably the two most important questions now that the customers are asking. So we're working with them to understand how we can feed that appetite for information. I think also from that perspective, organisations, rather than it perhaps the travel's sitting under the domain of a travel contract manager or the domain of a procurement manager, it's being a lot more inclusive across other parts of the business now. So we're finding that HR, risk, finance, well-being are all more actively involved in what that return to travel looks like, and understanding what is driving the levers for travel within that business. The other thing we recognise that historically, across our customers, we recognise about 45 to 50% of travel undertaken was actually for internal travel, people travelling between offices, attending induction courses, training, etc. Most of that, well, all of that has currently moved online. So organisations are also trying to understand, well, what does the new norm look like? How much of that can actually remain online? How much it needs to be replaced face-to-face? And those parts of the information or parts of the travel that do need to be replaced back into face-to-face, what does that look like in terms of utilisation of office space, external venues, etc.? I think echoing as Nicola said and Janet had said previously, there's a huge amount of attention to suppliers and supply distribution as well. So everybody, all our customers want to understand the implication, if you like, of a return to travel when they're in a position to. So that covers a number of things. It covers what is the supplier's social distancing policy, and again, we're looking across rail, train operating companies, hotels, airlines. A lot of questions we're getting asked into specific detail. For example, how do I access a station safely? And we did some work recently with Rail Delivery Group, and they were talking about social distancing and demand at peak times. If that demand came back to a significant degree, and you had a 2-metre social distancing at Euston Station, for example, prior to boarding an Avanti West Coast train, the normal demand, or 50–60% of demand, could actually result in a 1 kilometre queue to get into a station. So lots of questions around how far in advance would I need to potentially get to a station to get a time train? Would a train be mandatory seat reservation? What if I miss that train? So all the implications. And again, sometimes those implications actually make people think, you know what, there's a lot of hassle out there still. Would it be easier not to travel, or is it easier to jump in my own car, which I think we alluded to earlier with David. Also, I think it's clear that customers who have an overseas requirement recognise that will come back at the latter end. And obviously the current quarantine restrictions regarding travellers overseas also have implications then regarding what does that mean for me and my business in terms of those travellers that do travel overseas and would subsequently be quarantined at home. How do they accommodate that? How does the well-being of the traveller be able to ensure that they feel supported, feel safe to travel, and then that 14-day period, are they able to do their job as normal? So a lot of customers are saying, well, how is travel being phased back in, and what does it look like? A lot of organisations are looking at their travel policies, and they're defining the need to travel as a key part of that policy. Again, they're looking at why they travel, and that is being written into the policy, a very clear, I suppose, a clear edict to the traveller to say, these are the circumstances and when you would travel, these are the circumstances when perhaps you would utilise a technology solution instead. Also, a big part of travel is risk. So a lot of our customers are saying, what type of authorization processes do they need to be putting in place? And many organisations are looking at some sort of stage gate process to be able to authenticate the reason for travel. And it covers a number of areas. It covers the destination, it covers the mode of transportation, the health of the traveller, and any associated risk either en route or at that destination. And again, as part of that authorization, organisations are looking at new parameters now within their travellers, the health of their traveller, the ability to travel, the confidence of the traveller to travel. Questions previously was almost unwritten that if you had to travel on business, you could authenticate it and you could meet the requirement. Now they're recognised as a risk, and some people who perhaps have underlying health conditions, severe asthma might be a good example. There will be perhaps a further prolonged reluctance to be able to travel in the future. Also, a lot of organisations are looking at their own offices and how they can set those up and configure them to accommodate a new norm when people are utilising access to the offices again. So, for example, we work with a lot of customers in utilising our tools where we're helping them reconfigure their meeting rooms to be able to accommodate social distancing restrictions. So perhaps previously a meeting room that held 30 people will only be able to hold 12 people in the future. So how can we help them configure that, and how can we actually help them book that and optimize that internally? Also things like hot desks, meeting space, parking spaces actually on premise as well. And again, probably relevant to my hotel colleagues here is organisations are asking us about the types of rates they need moving forward for hotel reservations. In many instances, organisations have on-premise canteens. So perhaps they're looking at utilising people to eat on site as opposed to being able to eat on premise as and when that facility is available again. And so customers are coming to us and considering, do I need to be looking at, rather than perhaps bed and breakfast rates, do I need to be looking at room only rates? Conversely, other customers are saying, actually, would I be better to look at a bed, breakfast and dinner rate, an inclusive rate, and actually have that almost as a captive stay then, so that I've got no movement away from some of my travellers. So again, quite a variation there as well in terms of what they are doing. What we're doing a lot, and again, I suppose the diversity of the solutions out there is working with the customers and the suppliers to indicate what policies and how we can provide reassurance to both the organisation and to the traveller. So again, as Janet alluded to, that reassurance and the standardisation and the accreditation is a really important badge to be able to give customers that reassurance that they can travel again once they're able to. Challenge for us as an agent is it's probably fairly inconsistent across the whole air, rail, hotel spectrum, as we would expect, and it differs between airline to airline and train operating companies and hotels. But the message for us is we're now moving away from that education. You know, these were the problems and some of the challenges provided by the coronavirus situation. We're now moving from education to implication. The people now want to understand what it means for me as a business, what it means for me as a traveller. In terms of signs of movement within the sector, we're finding that, quite rightly so, customers aren't able to take the break off travel currently. We're seeing a lot more project work planned, so a lot more organisations who've perhaps got longer term, maybe construction or an ongoing piece of work in a certain area. There's a more definitive to travel and to plan that in advance. Obviously, we talked about shorter lead-in times, and we would expect that to continue as and when people are able to travel again. I think there's a lot more interest also in virtual solutions. So certainly our events team have probably been the busiest this year than they've ever been, but they're doing a lot more virtual events. They're doing a lot more virtual team building events as well. So it's been a tremendous growth area and perhaps an opportunity that wasn't optimized previously. So it's been the one positive, I suppose, from that perspective. But organisations are constantly trying to think about how they can continue to bring a remote workforce together and have the well-being of their employees, but also that team ethic as well, and trying to do that in a virtual world. We're definitely seeing, as we've talked about straight from the beginning here, that return from a domestic market. First of all, people aren't really looking beyond the UK at this moment in time, other than looking at potential air corridors, etc. We recognise that obviously to be able to facilitate those travel between two places, you've got to be able to have a departure and origin that are able to facilitate safe travel. So we're certainly finding that the UK market, which is a very dominant market for us, is that first market. We're also seeing a shift towards modes of transportation. So as we've seen return of frequency and services operated by train operating companies, that we expect there to be a little bit of a reluctance to take up those services until passengers can get the reassurance regarding the social distancing. We're taking, as a consequence, we're seeing a big increase in people talking about taking their own cars to hotels and an increased use of taxis and car hire. So that's been, again, a slight shift that we would normally see from previously. But I think that air travel, the challenge certainly for the international will be the continuation of the 14-day quarantine period. And I think we're really to continue to see how that happens. The worst case, obviously, the worst implication is we get a second spike, which could obviously completely delay that or could exacerbate the situation further. In terms of us as an industry and our corporate customers, support, I suppose, to need to stimulate the sector in the short term, I suppose that clear, concise government guidelines and guidance is relevant. A significant lead-in time to allow people to plan effectively, which we know is a challenge. It's getting a fine balance between a return to business as usual and having the right planning in place. I think also, the plea is out there from an economic perspective to the continued support across the hospitality and travel sectors and the SME providers. We recognise that travel is still very entrepreneurial. Many of the travel solutions can be relatively small. We really want to ensure that we have the diversity of choice and that our customers have the diversity of choice to continue to choose those as solutions moving forward. We also recognise that for many of our organisations and many of our corporates that are travelling, their revenue has dropped considerably. Cash is king, and price will be a key consideration for those that need to travel moving forward. But I think we and the customers also recognise that there needs to be a balance. There shouldn't be and couldn't be a race to the bottom. And it will probably start with incentivisation for the leisure travel again will lead to a natural return of corporate travel. And in that respect, what we're expecting our customers to expect is we are asking customers to, I suppose, expect the unexpected and expect there to be changes and expect the fluidity of the situation. There could be localised disruption. and this could obviously be dependent on on a rise in the R rate, and sometimes there will be rectifiable action needed when we've got travel plans. So if we're working with travel with a short lead-in time, you can be very reactive. If we've got people who perhaps try to plan further ahead, we've got a lot more interest in pre-trip reporting, how many people we've got going to London, potentially booked in a month's time, 6 weeks time, 8 weeks time, so that our customers can able to mitigate the circumstances, understand the scope of the scale of what their travelling profile looks like. We're also asking businesses to ensure and help them educate their travellers to put additional time in when travelling. I referenced the example of accessing stations and platforms. There will be capacity control in public areas. It'd be interesting to see what the impact will be on the roads as we return to a business as usual. If more people are potentially getting into cars. So we are very conscious that people who've got a very time prescriptive deadline on calendar need to have a bit more flexibility to be able to accommodate that moving forward. Also, I think we have to be realistic. We would expect a rise in prices. We expect capacity to be reduced, and whilst not all costs can be reduced at the same level, and we also recognise there could be additional costs incurred, such as additional cleaning, marshalling of stations, etc. And I think as part of our commitment is to work with our customers to be able to advise them of the fluidity of how that changes, so that they don't just have an expectation that it's going to be a buyer's market. And I think most of our customers who we've been able to be engaging with and be consultative with recognise some of the constraints, and I think it's been very gratifying to work with our customers to be able to work through lots of the practicalities and the implications across the solutions out there for travel. In terms of a return to new norm, well, I think for us, the domestic market is the one that will return first. We are expecting an uplift probably towards about a 50 to 60% return latterly in the year, probably really with looking at September onwards. Will certainly be a longer tail into 2021, and I think much of that will depend on demand and how organisations have adapted to a new normal. So hopefully it gives you a flavour there. We see the corporate market going, some of the questions we've been asked, some of the challenges being presented by customers, and how we're working collaboratively across the industry to be able to work, I suppose, in tripartite with our customers and with the suppliers. But the overriding message we're getting to our customers is, the business will come back, but for us, we don't know the levels of demand, and that's how we and our supply solutions need to be able to continue to adapt to that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for taking us through all of that. So I've got a couple of questions for you before I open it up to our other panelists. But just as a warning to our other panels, I'm going to ask you two kind of wrap up questions for all of you. So there's a part A and a part B. So part A is what support do you think is needed to stimulate the sector in the short term? And part B is, okay, if Nigel Huddleston, our tourism minister, walked in now to our panel, what would be your one message or one ask to him to help the sector? So just think about your answers to those questions for a wrap up. But just going back to Steve, in terms of will Capita Events and Travel be using the industry standards when they're published?
Yes, we will. I think it's important that we adopt the standards and we can play back a recognised standard accreditation to our customers that they can relate to. Yeah,
and I know it's really difficult to predict, Steve, in terms of when do you anticipate return back to normal? So that's either for your events and your corporate traveller, whether that be domestic or international. In terms of your kind of forecasting, where's your head at the moment?
I think we expect the domestic hotel market to come back first of all, because of a different mode of transportation to be able to get to the hotel. We would expect that to start returning realistically probably in August, September. We've always found in the corporate world that July, August have been relatively quieter. Now, traditionally, people went on holiday and took annual leave, but who knows anymore what the new norm is in that respect. We'd also expect rail to be able to come back, although the industry has been relatively quiet in terms of their solutions, and obviously we recognise there's limitations regarding capacity and social distancing on board, and the flights again to return at a latter stage. So I think a new norm in terms of expected business levels, realistically, we're looking into probably Q1, latter part of Q1 next year. But I don't think we should be kidding ourselves that we should be expecting business levels to return to what they were previously, because many of some of the internal meetings have now been replaced by technology. And, you know, with retrospect, we should expect that. We shouldn't be, how many times have people gone to a meeting, spent 3 hours going each way, and on the way home almost asked themselves, why would I just travel 3 hours for that meeting for an hour? So I think the new norm will be that travel will be more selective, and there'll need to be a greater return on investment for physical travel to take place.
I guess that leads me on to the second question for you, Steve. In terms of the events market, what percentage do you think will stay and remain as a virtual initiative rather than go back to face-to-face events?
I think the events will change the profile. So I think we could have more frequent, smaller events. So there may be more sort of almost hub events, depending on how the limitations of people being able to meet together. Certainly virtual meets have brought teams together, and certainly team building has brought that together, and using our expertise in that area. So we might actually see an increase in the number of events, but there'll be considerably smaller events, there'll be virtual events, and there'll be significantly cheaper events. So you've got to have some sort of a medium for being able to bring people together. So I think the events piece will change, and perhaps rather than bring in 500 people on site for a weekend, it may just change into smaller regional areas or parts virtual. We've been doing those successfully. It's certainly been a lot of interest, and you know, again, that will have an impact from a cost perspective as well, in terms of the money available for organisations to be able to invest in an event, certainly over the next 12 months or so. So that next 12-month period, you know, I'm sure we've all seen it. So many Christmas parties and awards ceremonies have all been deferred for the next 9 months or so. So realistically, the events of physical events won't return until the middle part of 2021 at the earliest.
Great, thanks. And can I bring in Dan and Nicola then, in terms of the forecast in terms of return to normal? What are you thinking across the next, you know, short to medium term?
It's a very difficult prediction, right? Because it seems to be very different from country to country. We'll expect some recovery, obviously, but I can't give you complete numbers now. Some recovery towards the end of the year. But as everyone alluded to, the international part will not come back anytime soon. So it's to see what different sectors it's coming from, what the impact on business travel will be. Will that be replaced? Will the domestic traveler make up for this? So I think there's too many question marks to be able to give like a clear guidance. But obviously, you know, Q4 we should see recovery, but by what time we'll be back at pre-COVID status, it's hard to predict from our side.
Yeah. Nicola, anything to add in terms of thoughts on that?
I mean, just to I guess echo what Dan has said there. I know from of the STR webinars that I've attended, they've been looking at Asia, how that's recovered, but they're a lot more heavily domestic than we are in terms of demand. So China's come back a small bit. They're up to about 42-45% occupancy at the moment, which is, I never thought I'd be like, woohoo, 45% occupancy, that looks great. But compared to where they were, it's a lot better. There's too many variables, I think, at the moment. It's a little bit unknowable in that sense from our perspective.
Okay. Thanks, Nicola. So just before I go on to my all panel questions, so there's just a couple of questions that have come in. So Dave has just answered back in terms of a question that was prompted. What services can you give to the tourism, hospitality and leisure industry? So there's plenty in there, Dave, and we'll make sure that links go out. So you might want to think about health and safety, management development, food safety, first aid, fire marshal, as well as, you know, risk assessments and taking on the industry standard that's coming out. And a plug for Alice. So Alice from Invisible Manchester's training some people who have experienced homelessness to become walking tour guides. Brilliant initiative, and they're hiring, which is, you know, great. So we'll give you a plug there, Alice. Thank you. So the last questions then. So what support is still needed? We focused quite a lot of our attention in the first couple of months going into lockdown on supporting industry and getting initiatives and all the schemes to them and enabling understanding of those. But what is now needed for this sector in terms of stimulus for the sector? And that question about, okay, Nigel's just walked in, what's the ask to him? So who wants to kick off? Shall I come to you first, Dan?
I'd say it's interesting. We've done from our side a lot of roundtable conversations with partners in different cities throughout the UK, and the one topic really that came up again and again, and I know we're working on it in the background, but it's really the demand for proactive voicing of, okay, it is safe to go there, these are the measures we're doing, but we're proactive with it, right? So how can, if you want to look at Manchester, how can Manchester, for example, differentiate itself and go out with a proactive message and say, yes, it's safe to come here, this is the measures we're doing, this percentage of properties adhere to a certain standard that we deem as safe, because it's all about the customer perception at this point in time. And I would say a similar message I would have to Nigel. There needs to be a balance between risk and gain. I know there's a lot of talks on the 14-day quarantine restrictions at the moment. Is that giving the wrong message? Are we going back again and demoting customer confidence in one shape, way, or form, because that has such a huge impact on the travel industry? That would be my 2 points on those questions.
Great, thanks, Dan. Over to you, Dave, then. Those 2 questions. What's needed to stimulate the sector, and what would you ask the Tourism Minister?
I think the first point is that we need some clear guidance in the form that we've had for the other settings on what the requirements are. So once we've got those in place, all those present on the webinar and wider as your members can have a clear action plan. They need to carry out, obviously, their risk assessments and put in place whatever measures it is. And I think, as Dan was saying there, the most important thing is to gain customer confidence that your establishments are a safe place to come and that they're going to be comfortable there and be safe, and therefore they're likely to book. So it's to ask for the clarity on that guidance to help promote so that the sector can get itself in shape, ready to get customers back in.
Thanks, Dave. Nicola, what do you think?
I guess to echo Dan around the quarantine piece, there's definitely big question marks over that, even within the common travel area, while, and this is a broader conversation, I guess, while guests can come from Ireland, they still have to quarantine for 14 days when they go home to Ireland. So there's, I guess, a wider conversation around the quarantine piece, and not just here in the UK, but to create those kind of air corridors or those air bridges with other countries, so that it's easy for travel to get started again, whilst respecting that there is obviously a public health concern and a risk attached to that.
Yeah, it's something that we really feel strongly about in terms of the quarantine, because it's just put a blanket right across. There's no kind of scientific or country by country approach. Yeah. We definitely lobbied along with our 10 other northern destinations last week and got some media coverage on that. So I'm really hoping that they'll look at that in a more sensible country by country basis. And over to you then, Steve, for the last words. Yeah,
so again, I think we've got the same sentiment here. The quarantine is a big prohibitor to growth. Again, clear governance, clear communication, allowing time for suppliers to be able to plan effectively, and allow then for the right communication to go out. And I suppose my biggest fear is if that reassurance is not given, it's not given timely enough to be able to create enough demand, we're heading for an almighty crash when the furlough scheme finishes. And the plea, if the tourism business to me now has said, you need to look at the tourism and hospitality industry separately, because it's one thing people being allowed to travel, It's another thing, people wanting to travel. If we don't get that right and the gap is too long, that bridge is going to be too big to fill in the short term, and we're going to have huge short-term losses for organisations. The business will build up again, but then potentially you've lost some of those people to this great industry. So I think we need to be able to do something about that very quickly.
Yeah, and to your point about events, perhaps, what's your point on the 2 metre rules, Steve, just quickly?
I think we need to be able to reduce it if we can. I think if we can get to a 1 or 1.5 metre rule, again, there's lots of information out there as well. I think if we can get to 1 metre, that would certainly help a lot of the smaller premises to be able to facilitate people on site. Many, that could be the difference between a business being able to survive and a business not being able to survive. So I think we need to pragmatically look at how real the risk is, and if we can move towards a 1 metre distancing rule to be able to facilitate as many businesses as possible coming back to a new norm.
Sheona, if I could just add to that, I don't know whether anybody else has kind of witnessed. I've been picking up on the radio where we've been talking about social distancing, the term "where possible" has crept in. And, whilst it, I don't know whether that's official or just a radio station that I was listening to at the time. As far as, there's government guidelines, it's guidelines, it's not a law as such. And risk assessment is about taking mitigating action. So as I mentioned, if it was in an office setting, for instance, you might be back to back rather than face to face. And we've got PPE that in some cases the PPE can mitigate the risk and the closeness of people. Where possible, yeah, we absolutely should have the social distancing. But if you've got suitable PPE and other things, screens maybe, other things in place, it might be that you can get closer than the 2 meters.
Yeah, so I guess that's when it's a case by case scenario, outdoor,
absolutely,
things, workspaces, and all of that risk. Yeah, but I think I wouldn't want anyone to go away from this conversation as to that it's the 2 metre rule at the moment we're trying to follow.
Yeah, we should be where we can.
It's just completely, it's not feasible in terms of an economic model going forward. So thank you to all our speakers. I think definitely challenging times. We're all trying to be innovative as we can. I think there's one thing for sure: partnership and collaboration in all of this is essential if we're going to make any difference. And Mancunians, we know how to do that. We've done it before. We've risen to challenges. So I think together we can do this. I'm really excited about sharing with you our recovery campaign. It's really flexible. It'll take us forward over the next months, I guess 6 to 8 months. So we can share that with you, our members meeting. Any of the speakers welcome to come to that. It's on the 25th of June, 11 o'clock, and you'll be getting invites about that. Our weekly newsletters will carry on going out. And after this, you'll get a whole pack of information from our speakers as well. So that's just to wrap up, and just to say thank you so much again to Janet, who's now left us, Dan, Nicola, Dave and Steve for joining us this morning. Thank you to all of you for joining and for your questions. Any questions, just keep them coming. So thank you, stay safe, and hopefully we'll be in touch again very soon. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.